Alright, so we're back, of course, talk about some more Crisis Core Reunion. This is the upcoming game. We're going to talk about this game a lot. I came across a Reddit post recently, accidentally. I was looking up, like, Nibelheim incident shit with, like, before Crisis. I was trying to get, like, some images from that game. And then, like, the suggested images for some of that shit. Like, I came across a Reddit post from a couple months back that I thought had an interesting idea. Now, what we're going to talk about today isn't specifically going to be about this person's theory on Reddit. Though we might talk about some aspects of it, because there are some interesting observations and things in the Reddit post, but more so it's just like their post itself kind of inspired this discussion I wanted to have. Which is, one of the things that we're talking about when it comes to Crisis Core Reunion is whether or not it's actually going to be a one-to-one remake/remaster, right? A lot of people, including myself, believe that there could be some new stuff. Now, I more so fall on the fence that I think the game itself is going to be the same, and that maybe we could get like a post-credit scene. I think that makes the most sense. I don't think they're going to change anything necessarily in the game itself, but of course they could if they wanted to. Some people do think that there could be a new ending to the game, which they could do that, but I think that would take away from the impact of Zack's death. And I've said this before a lot on the channel, but they don't need to change anything in Crisis Core of the game, because even if they change absolutely zero shit about the game in the world, it would still make sense and connect to Remake, because you get that Zack lived. Like, that's kind of the whole point of Crisis Core, is to know that Zack died and kind of how that happened, how Cloud got the Buster Sword, etc., etc. And to change that would kind of take away the impact of Remake's ending, which is why I think that Zack's still going to die at the end. Which is why I think it makes more sense for there to either be like a bonus ending you can unlock, or maybe like a post-credit scene type thing. But even all that being said, if they added absolutely nothing new at all, if it's the same Crisis Core we played 15 years ago, it's just prettier and plays better, it still works and it still connects to Remake. So there doesn't have to be new stuff. The point of saying all this is that for now, I'm just going to believe what the devs are saying. The devs are out there saying that the game is absolutely the same Crisis Core. They haven't changed anything about it. It's the same Crisis Core from 15 years ago. For now, I'm going into Reunion with that mindset. If there's new stuff, then hell yeah, I'm going to be surprised. Whereas people that are going in there 100% expecting new stuff, if that doesn't happen, they're going to be let down. Which I would rather be in the fucking former camp on that. But what if there are new stuff? What if there is changes, but it's just not happening in Crisis Core Reunion? What if it's actually taking place in Rebirth? I've been saying this since they revealed Crisis Core Reunion, that I think it has a purpose. And I mean this more than just telling Zack's backstory, the backstory of other characters. There's got to be a reason that they're finally re-releasing this game 15 years later, right? Because according to the devs, there's never been a reason for it. Like, they never had like a copyright issue or like a GACT issue, or whatever the case. They just kind of, for some reason, have not ported the game ever. Just, they don't really have a reason for it. But all of a sudden, right before we're going to get, Rebirth, they're going to drop a Crisis Core remaster. Like, finally, after all these years. Which is particularly odd considering how much Crisis Core spoils when it comes to, like, the big twist of OG FF7, especially because the devs say that it's going to be the same FF7 story going forward with the trilogy, right? So the same story beats, essentially. Obviously, there's going to be new shit in the sense that they're expanding the game. But the story, according to the devs, is going to be relatively similar to the original FF7, which is why it's super weird that they're dropping this game, because even if they were to change, like, the ending, for example, and connect it to Remake, Zack, Live, etc., etc., I don't know how they would do that, but if they did, the rest of the game's still going to be the same Crisis Core. So you're still going to see all the events of the Nibelheim incident and know that it was never Cloud. Cloud was just a grunt soldier, kind of nobody back then, and all of it was Zack. So when we get to the beginning of Rebirth, and Cloud's recalling the events of the Nibelheim incident, we're already going to know as the players, even whether you're old or new player, because you played Crisis Core Reunion, or maybe even played fucking Ever Crisis when that comes out, that this isn't true. Which is why I don't think that Cloud's faulty memory is necessarily going to be the big crux of the FF7 Remake trilogy story. I've said this before, and I could be wrong on this, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I think that Cloud's going to learn the truth sooner. I don't think Cloud's faulty memory is going to be the big twist in the game anymore. That's not to say that we're not going to get like a live stream scene or something equivalent. I'm not saying that there's not going to be faulty memory shenanigans when it comes to the second game, because of course there's going to be. This is the most important scene with OG FF7. I'm just saying it doesn't need to be stretched out till game 3. Because a lot of people are of the belief that Rebirth is going to go as far as the North Crater. But even if that is the case, the Broken Mind live stream scene and all of the shit doesn't happen until after that. So I just don't think they're going to stretch out Cloud's faulty memories till the end of the trilogy, because there's kind of no point. It's like the biggest elephant in the room next to Aerith's death, right? And if you've played Crisis Core Reunion, or even Ever Crisis once that drops, there's no big twist. Like, you already know the Cloud's lying. You already know the Cloud has the faulty memories and he's not telling the truth. You already know that it was all Zack. So there's no twist in the Remake trilogy if they keep the story the same. What if the point of Crisis Core Reunion is just to get a baseline for what initially happened? Whether you are a new or old player, these are the events that took place before FF7, but also technically FF7 Remake. And then once we get to Rebirth, we're going to learn that there are some different aspects to it, especially if you're comparing like maybe Rebirth to the original FF7. Now, the changes could be anywhere from big to small, just kind of depending on what they want to do with the story. Because what initially inspired this conversation outside of just the Reddit post is we're talking on Twitter about like Genesis. There's people that just don't like Genesis, and I get it, whatever. He's never really bothered me that much, but I get why people don't like the character. People wanted him like to be edited out of the game or taken out of certain cutscenes or whatever the case, but like, I don't know how to say this any nicer. That's just kind of stupid. He's like the main antagonist of Crisis Core. You can't just get rid of Genesis. That's like remaking or re-releasing FF7 and just, hey, let's go ahead and get rid of Jenova. Or let's go ahead and get rid of Sephiroth. This doesn't make sense. I mean, there's probably a lot of different scenes people don't like Genesis in, but one of the main ones, and I can kind of agree with this one, is the Nibelheim incident. Because according to Crisis Core, Genesis is a big part of why Sephiroth kind of goes crazy and kills everybody. Which, obviously, if you played OG FF7, there was no Genesis to be found. So it's a massive retcon that, according to Crisis Core, Genesis was always there. Like, the events play out relatively the same as they did in OG FF7, but in Crisis Core, Genesis just kind of comes out of nowhere and vomits exposition to Sephiroth. Tell him the truth of Jenova, dug up 2,000 years ago, he's a monster, whatever.
Sephiroth, you were the greatest monster created by the Jenova Project. The Jenova Project was the term used for all experiments relating to the use of Jenova's cells. Poor little Sephiroth. You've never actually met your mother. You've only been told her name, no? Jenova was excavated from a 2,000-year-old rock layer. Jenova Project G gave birth to Angeal and monsters like myself. Jenova Project S used the remains of countless failed experiments to create a perfect monster. You will rot. I see. Perfect monster indeed.
Again, exposition vomit. Now, I'm not somebody that necessarily hates this to a certain degree. Now, the retcon itself is terrible, and people just don't like the character Genesis. That's another reason why they don't like this scene. Retcons, I can agree, are bad. But you have somebody telling Sephiroth all this information, has Sephiroth second-guessing himself, and then he goes to the Shinra Manor and does the research and sees that it is in fact true. So I think in that regard, it's not necessarily bad, because he has one source telling him this shit. He goes and does the research, and it's corroborated. He sees that it is in fact true. And this has kind of been a question for a while now when it comes to the remake trilogy, but when we get to the Calm flashback, is Genesis going to be there? That's a big thing, man. The Nibelheim incident, is Genesis going to be a part of it? Because based on the compilation, he is. And that could maybe be one of the changes if you're looking at, Rebirth's Calm flashback versus OG FF7's Calm flashback. Obviously, Genesis is there for Crisis Core, so there wouldn't be a difference between Crisis Core and Rebirth. But what if he's there? What if he is a part of this? And what if that's a big part of why Crisis Core Reunion is even happening? Is to introduce you to these characters that we're going to see going forward in the compilation. Because we talk about this also on Twitter. I think Genesis is going to be a part of the game. There's other people out there that don't think he's going to be, but again, it's a bias of them not liking the character that they just don't want him to be in those sequels or the next games. It's not a matter of whether or not he is going to be there. They just don't want the character there. So going forward right now with the discussion, we're just going to assume that Genesis is going to be there for the Calm flashback with Rebirth. If you only played Remake, or maybe you played Remake and then retroactively went back and played OG FF7, maybe, and then you skip Crisis Core for whatever reason. If you were to hop into Rebirth and Genesis is there, you're going to be like, who the fuck is this guy? In the red coat with one wing floating down from the sky, quoting Loveless and telling Sephiroth everything. He wasn't there in OG FF7. Why is he here now? Maybe it's a major part of why they're re-releasing Crisis Core is just to introduce you to these characters because they're going to play a bigger role. Because Genesis and Angeal exist, at least, when it comes to Remake. Now, Angeal's probably an angel in the sky. That's where the White Feather comes from with the Rebirth trailer, potentially. But Genesis is still alive, based on the continuity that we have with FF7 Compilation, right? He gets taken to Deep Ground, he's there until, like, the end of Dirge of Cerberus. Even with that alone, we just know that Genesis exists somewhere in the world when it comes to Remake, but there's also the possibility that we've talked about a lot, that Remake is, in some ways, a sequel to the Compilation, right? That's always a possibility. And if that is the case, then what we're playing and experiencing with the Remake trilogy could be post-Dirge of Cerberus, so we can maybe be getting a follow-up to this shit right here. And to be clear, I'm not saying that that's what's happening when it comes to Remake, but that's just one of the possibilities, one of the theories out there. We're not really going to know what's going on until we get Rebirth. Now, this, of course, is just talking about changes on the smaller end of stuff. We're just talking about them adding Genesis into the Calm flashback / Nibelheim incident, or adding him further into the story going forward with the Remake trilogy. On the bigger end of changes when it comes to like Crisis Core Nibelheim incident versus what happens with Rebirth is that maybe Cloud recalls it accurately. Maybe when we do the calm flashback, it plays out exactly the same, right? Except that once we get to Nibelheim later on in the story, things are very, very different. Now, in the original FF7, when we get to Nibelheim, it just looks normal. Shinra had rebuilt it and kind of covered up the massacre that happened there. But the controversy there with the original FF7 is that you're trying to figure out whether or not Cloud's telling the truth. And even Tifa remembers the Nibelheim incident, but even she's not sure why the hell the town looks the exact same. So maybe they're both misremembering the Nibelheim incident. Maybe it didn't actually happen. That's kind of what they're doing with the original FF7. But what if the twist is, when it comes to Rebirth, that the town actually was never destroyed, or maybe the town looks different from when we played the calm flashback, or it's different from how Tifa and Cloud remember it? Or what if a lot of the people that died during the calm flashback are actually still alive? Maybe like Cloud's mother. And this would be the repercussions of what we did inside the Singularity, the ripple effect. We already see it kind of happening at the end of Remake, where it appears that Zack's alive. There's a whole different discussion to be had on what's going on with Zack, but it appears that he's alive. We see the alternate chip bag. We see the differently designed Midgar. So it seems like we either hop timelines or change the history of this timeline, change things about this world, right? I've said this before on the channel, but it never made sense to me that if we're defeating the Whispers throughout time, which seems to be happening because Zack is being saved in the past, the Zack Final Stand happens, about 3 months before FF7. What if it goes even further than just 3 months in the past? What if it goes back a couple years or a long ass time? Who knows what kind of butterfly effect this would have? So what if we play Crisis Core Reunion, we play Ever Crisis, we get the calm flashback at the beginning of Rebirth, but then we get to Nibelheim later on in the Rebirth story, and shit's way different. What if it's not just that the town's here and maybe they have faulty memories? What if Claudia's alive? What if Brian, Tifa's dad's alive? What if some of their childhood friends are still alive and all the people they grew up with and shit? And that could be like the big twist when it comes to the remake story, and that'd work for new and old players. If you're a newer player, it's just a twist, right? It's a cool twist. If you're an older player, you're expecting to walk into Nibelheim and there'd be like Shinra employees pretending to be residents of Nibelheim. But what if Cloud walks into his childhood home in OG FF7, it's just some woman there, just some person there. But if we walk in there in Rebirth, it's fucking Claudia. And just kind of further add on to the possibility of Nibelheim being very, very different once we get there in Rebirth, but also adding on to Cloud potentially learning the truth sooner of his past. We have the Rebirth trailer, the Japanese version, where Cloud straight up says Zack's name. That seems to imply that he's going to learn the truth of Zack sooner. Because in Remake, you could even hear Zack's name without getting like one of his little headaches or whatever the case, right? But with the Japanese version of the trailer, he's straight up talking about Zack and to Zack. Zack, you were here with me 5 years ago. Where are you now? Now, obviously, that quote is a little bit out of context. We don't know exactly where it's happening. There's a couple different places that Zack and Cloud have gone together, but in theory, it's probably Nibelheim. But regardless, people think that Rebirth is only going to go as far as the North Crater, which is still before Cloud remembers who Zack is in OGFF7, which is Midil in the live stream after the North Crater. So the fact that Cloud is even saying Zack's name at all in Rebirth is a big fucking deal. Unless for some reason it's like a misdirection and it's like the alternate timeline Cloud that Zack was saved in at the end of Remake, unless we get like some follow-up with him, then it's our remake Cloud learning the truth of Zack before Midil. Unless Rebirth goes beyond North Crater and goes up to Midil, and we have the live stream segment there and he learns who Zack is. And to kind of further dive down this rabbit hole before we wrap up the video, what if the culmination of the remake story is that they have to change things back to how they happened in the original FF7? Because that's kind of the whole point, is us changing Destiny. But what if the ripple effect of us changing Destiny is Aerith not dying, Zack not dying, Claudia living, Tifa's dad living, all the people in Nibelheim living, etc., etc. A lot of things that are different from the original FF7, but this kind of leads to Sephiroth being successful in whatever his goals or plans are. So by the end of the story, the group realizes that they need to set it back to how it was with the original timeline, air quotes, so that Zack has to die, Aerith has to die, Claudia has to die, Brian Lockhart has to die. Like, that shit would hit hard AF. If we got all the happiness of these characters being alive again, getting to experience life with them, but by the end of the story, we got to change it back. Either way, these are kind of the two extremes when it comes to potential changes that we might see in Rebirth, because it could be as small as just simply adding Genesis to the Calm Flashback, making it more solidified as canon, and him possibly appearing later on. But then also maybe something as major as there being some of the actual ripple effect of what happens at the end of Remake, and the point of Crisis Core is to show you what initially happened. As per usual, this video got way longer than I wanted it to be, so we're not really going to look at or discuss the Reddit post, but it doesn't really matter anyways. But I will link it in the description below if you want to check it out. There's some interesting ideas with it. So to kind of trim the fat here and kind of get to the point, the TLDR here at the end, what if Crisis Core Reunion really doesn't have anything new? But that's kind of the point. They just need you to see the original continuity, what actually happened back in the day, but also introduce you to some new characters you might see in the future games, whether that's Rebirth or the third game, or maybe even like DLCs or spin-off games, whatever that might be, who knows. But also, what if Cloud's like recalling the Nibelheim incident, but there's aspects of it that are different from what we did in Crisis Core to insinuate that maybe this is an alternate timeline from OG FF7 timeline. Maybe the calm flashback's different from what we played in Crisis Core. But also, what if we get to Nibelheim and what's happening there is very, very different from the original FF7, as in maybe, again, characters are alive, or it could be something else entirely. That's just what I came up with off the top of the head. But also, what if in general shit plays out differently with Rebirth? Because one of the big like complaints, so to speak, when it came to the original FF7 is Tifa knowing the truth of the Nibelheim incident, but never really calling Cloud on his bullshit. And what if that's different? What if we get to the beginning of Rebirth and Cloud starts going through the calm flashback, and at a certain point, Tifa cuts him off and it's like, no, that's not what happened. This is what happened. Do you not remember Zack? Like, that'd be some crazy shit, bro. I'd love to see that. Something different. I think I've talked about this before on the channel when discussing this a little bit, but outside of maybe like Tifa thinking that she's the one that's remembering shit inaccurately, which I guess that could be why she didn't cut off Cloud or correct Cloud or whatever. But like, if your friend's telling a story of something that happened to y'all in the past, but they're getting details wrong, like you correct them. You do like, no, that's not what happened. This is what happened, dude. And like you tell your part of the story or how you remember it. Like, so it's kind of always been weird that Tifa didn't do that at some point. Their FF7 original, and maybe that's something they also changed when it comes to Rebirth. I think as right now, the point of Crisis Core Reunion is to show us what originally happened, because it's going to be different. Like, something about what happens in Crisis Core Reunion is going to show up in Rebirth that's going to be different. Now, this could be the Nibelheim incident. It could be other aspects of the Crisis Core story. I don't entirely know. I just personally believe that Reunion is existing for something outside of just backstory for characters. I think there's an absolute purpose to this game, and while we're finally getting that remaster all these years later, there's a reason they want you to play this, because I think something's going to be different going forward. That's going to be the video, my dudes. It's a long one. It's a thick boy. It's probably the longest video we've done in quite some time, but I just had a lot of thoughts over the last couple of days. I've been wanting to do this video for quite a while, because I actually seen that Reddit post, like, got inspiration for this video, like, probably a week or two ago or something like that. It's been a little while. I just kind of been going over it in my head, trying to think about what I wanted to discuss. And we went into it a lot more than I was expecting. That's going to be the video, my dudes. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you guys are anyone studying more Crisis Core, Final Fantasy VII Reunion content. Turn on notifications, follow me to dash what I'm Discord, links to the are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Jenova.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.